As many of you will be all too painfully aware, BPS is on the way out on a gradual reduction through to 2027, and 2023 will be the first year when it will be a really big hit coming out of what you had 2 or 3 years ago. So we've got 4, I think, great speakers today to sort of address that subject. Steve Bellingham joins us, the Senior Advisor from the Agriculture Environment team of Natural England. Pete Belk from the Catchment Sensitive team of the Severn Vale area is speaking to us. Jenny Phelps from FWAG, who will be known to many of you locally. And finally, Susie Bamber from Severn Trent, who's a Senior Agricultural Advisor with them. And the idea of this meeting was the steering group felt that there were lots of ways which you as farmers and businessmen can draw money onto your business now, but it'd be really good to try and sort of collate different organisations together and hear it all in one place, and try and make sense and pull together these funding resources. So that's what we're going to try and do today. We'll run through our 4 speakers and then have some discussion at the end for those that want to pose questions to our speakers. If there's any burning questions, we'll deal with those after each presentation. I hope it will work. The speakers are going to share their screens and present a few slides each, and we'll backwards and forwards to their presentations. But we're going to start with the man of the moment, Andrew Waters. He's our Cheltenham Monitor farmer. Andrew's going to just give us a bit of a run through for those who haven't been to Boddington Estates at what the farm is and the challenges facing him. So without further ado, Andrew, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Philip. Good morning, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Andrew Walters, farm manager here at Boddington Estates, responsible for about 600 hectares of mixed farming. With a small team, we're currently cropping approximately 500 hectares, with the remainder consisting of grass, herbal lays, pasture and woodland. We also run a stabilised. So moving on with the theme of the meeting, what are my objectives? How am I going to survive, or how is our business going to survive without our good old faithful friend, the BPS? In monetary terms, to my business or our business, it's worth in excess of 100k, so a significant amount of money. Firstly, my objectives are to run a successful and professional business, but in line with the owner's ambitions, for the business to be profitable and financially viable, which is not always easy, and a transition into a more sustainable farming approach to change our establishment methods, and having a more flexible approach to cropping, growing crops we may not have wanted to grow or thought about growing in the past. And for us here, importantly, temporarily taking out high pressure grass weed fields to reduce the burden and to get on top of the problems. Signing up to a new mid-tier stewardship scheme after being out of the scheme for 8 years for us was something that we've just done. Getting an income from all those unproductive areas, most of which have been down to existing grass margins or wild bird and wildflower margins that we weren't historically being paid for, which seemed crazy. And lastly, getting good advice. I think that's really important. Listening to what funding's available, and I'm sure there's going to be lots of advice this morning. Sort of to round off, really, in conclusion, I don't think in our case we'll ever recoup the full BPS payment or bridge that financial gap. But with the changes that I'm trying to implement and any potential funding that's available, I'm hoping that might soften the blow somewhat. But maybe I'll be proved wrong today. So we'll see how that goes. So over to you, Philip.
Great, Andrew. That's a great opener and a challenge for everybody. So we'll move swiftly on to Steve. Steve, as I say, Steve Bellingham is the senior advisor in the Agriculture team at Natural England. And Steve, if I can invite you to share your screen and work through your presentation.
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much, Philip.
I'll tell you if that's slides coming up. You can see that. That's great.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Yeah, my name's Steve. I'm based in Worcester, so I'm not very far away from Cheltenham. I'm in a national operations team, and we sort of work on existing schemes rather than future schemes. And it's really the team I'm in. We sort of enable the Natural England area teams to do their agri-environment work. That's basically what we do. So I've got 5 slides, so I'll just run through those quickly, Philip. I think I've got about 10 minutes. So the first one, just really sort of setting the scene of environmental land management, and I'm going to talk mostly about countryside stewardship. So as you'll know, environmental land management, there's three parts of it: sustainable farming incentive, and there was the pilot in 21, then 22 saw some more standards come out, and then 23 this year there's another 6 standards out, and new payment rates as well this year. Countryside stewardship, I'll talk more about that in a minute, and then there's the other part of it, the landscape recovery. And as you probably know, there was the LNR that's now gone. So that was what was that, local nature recovery, that's gone, and countryside stewardship will carry on instead. I'm sure you've all picked that up in the press. So countryside stewardship in 2023. So the first bit, the capital offer. So that's already open. That opened on the 5th of January. It's a rolling window, so it'll always be open unless RPA run out of budget. There's now 2 capital offers. So there's the existing standalone offer that you'll have seen in the past. There are a few new options in there. And then there's the new CS higher tier capital offer, which has another 20 options in. And they've extended the plans. Capital works plans are now 3 years long rather than 2, so that's a change this year as well. Higher tier, that opened earlier this week on the 7th. I think that was Tuesday. Yeah, on Tuesday. And the window closes at the end of April. And if you're successful with the application, it'll start 1st of Jan 24. There's a range of revenue options in there. Most of them are 5-year longs, but some are 10. So that's for creation options, or if you're on commons, for example. Capital works plans, again, there are 3 years long. Mid-tier. Now, that'll open. It's expected to open in March and it'll close in August. That's what we're expecting. RPA making some quite substantial changes to the application process at the moment, and it's going to be an IT process from now on. And it does actually sound pretty good. Actually, it should be a simpler way of applying. And as you probably saw, DEFRA have increased. All the revenue rates have gone up. And then capital items, most of those have gone up as well. So that was all announced. I think that was 5th of Jan as well. So move on to the next slide. So this is, I mean, it sounds quite dull, but it's quite fundamental. From the 1st of Jan, all agri-environment agreements moved on to domestic terms and conditions. So all the money is now UK Treasury. There is no EU money in it at all. And EU has no longer has a role in agri-environment in England. So that means, before, when we were in the EU, as you'll remember, a raw development round lasted for 7 years. We had to go to Europe with the programme, and then they'd approve it, and then it was pretty much set in stone for those 7 years. We're no longer constrained by that. DEFRA, if they decide something's not working or they want to change something, they can change it. So it's going to be much quicker and more flexibility, and that's what you're going to see coming through. And you'll start to see that now with the next few things I'm going to mention. So the first thing is all existing agreement holders. So if you're in an HLS agreement that's extended or still on the original HLS because it hasn't been extended yet, or you're in a CS agreement, you can end it without penalty, providing that the new scheme that you're going into, which would be a CS scheme, is of equivalent or better environmental value. So that's this equivalent sort of rule. So that's a new one. With existing HLS agreements, you can now place CS revenue options on parcel without options in your agreement, or on parcels with only ELS options, as long as there's space to do so. So the way I think about that is, if you've got a margin, grass margin, that's an ELS margin, the rest of the field you haven't got anything on, if you wanted to put an option in there, you can now do that. And the other thing you can do now as well is you can add capital, so those standalone capital CS grants, you can add those to an existing agreement, be that an HLS agreement or a CS agreement, as long as your existing capital works plan, you've done the work and you've been paid for it. So the existing plan has been finished. Obviously, all HLS plans will have been finished, a long time ago. But if you've got CS and you finish the capital works plan, you can now have another one. So just as a sort of final summary slide, really, this just going through what existing customers can do and what you can do as a new customer. So as an existing customer, if you're in the position where your HLS and the RPA doing a lot of this work at the moment, and extensions, offering a lot of extensions, if you offered a 5-year HLS extension and that fits with your farming system, you can accept that. There's also mirrors of CS agreements. So if you've had a CS that's run for 5 years and finishing at the end of this year, the end of 23, and it still works for you, you can accept the mirror offer to that. You can, alongside your existing agreements, you can have revenue options on land not currently covered. You can make those capital applications. You can use that early exit without penalty if you wish, or you could make a new application using the equivalence test. So those are all the things that an existing customer can do. So you can see there's a lot more flexibility. I suppose it adds flexibility, but it also adds complexity. There's a lot more to think about. For new customers, you can go for SFI. You can make a capital standalone application if you just want to do some simple capital works. You can go for mid-tier, which will do most things, or you can go for higher tier if you've either got woodland or something more complex that you want to do. And there's going to be more from DEFRA on this shortly. There's the landscape recovery pilot if you want to go for that, or obviously the other option, you don't have to do anything. If you don't want to, you can decide that this isn't for you, or you could wait for more announcements on what's coming in 24 and beyond when DEFRA announced that. So Philip, that's all my slides. So if I can,
that's great. Thank you, Steve.
Work out there, I'll stop sharing.
I think it's the sort of thing I pick up from your presentation is the massive flexibility that's available now, which I think is really good. But as you say, adds to complexity as well.
Yes.
And there's no immediate questions, but maybe that will come out as we go through our following speakers as to sort of how we can sort of weave this flexibility into a program to benefit a business. So we'll move on, if that's all right. We're joined by Pete Belk this morning, who's Catchment Sensitive Farming Officer for the Severn Vale, as I said earlier. And without further ado, Pete, I'll hand over to you to see how your part of the equation ties into all this.
Brilliant. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Just work out how to share my screen quickly.
I'll let you know when it pops up. Yep, that's good. We can see that, Steve. Pete, sorry.
Perfect. Great. So yeah, thank you very much for having me this morning. My name is Pete Belk. I am a Catchment Sensitive Farming Advisor at Natural England, covering the Severn Vale catchment. So that's more or less everywhere between Stroud and Worcester. Not going quite as far over as the River Wye, but and stopping kind of at the Cotswold escarpment, but everything in between. And for those of you that aren't aware, Catchment Sensitive Farming is a program delivered in partnership between DEFRA, the EA, and Natural England. And our main focus is really about supporting farmers to tackle water and air quality issues, and to address natural flood management as well in catchments all across England. The way we work is that we're divided into catchment teams. So we have a West Midlands area team that's closer to the cohort that are probably here today, each of us focusing on one of those sub-catchments. So wherever you're based, you'll be able to get through to someone who's local to you. So yeah, as I mentioned, those are the kind of the key objectives of CSF. The way that we achieve those aims is through a couple of different routes. First of all, we're able to link farmers into specialist advice. So working with partners, including the likes of Promar and others, we will deliver quite specialist tailored advice to support both sort of improvements to water and air quality, biodiversity, but also always with the lens of improving the resilience of your business as well. So I would say that as we go through this presentation, there are kind of two ways that, thinking of that kind of how do we make up the shortfall in BPS, two ways we can do that. One is through basic sort of building sort of business resilience, and the other is through more kind of direct activity through grants we can link you into and the advice. So just a quick recap of and without wanting to kind of teach anyone to suck eggs at all, but just to kind of frame, I suppose, some of the things I'm going to be talking about. Where do we focus our efforts? It's really on trying to address some of these sort of sources of pollution within the catchment. So point sources in the yard, so runoff from FYM heaps, for example, clean and dirty water mixing and entering clean water drainage systems, runoff from fields left bare, for example, into watercourses, sprayer drift, faulty drains and so on. All of those things can be sort of sources of pollution within the natural environment. The other one that we're really focused on at the moment is air quality, so looking at ammonia in particular, mainly kind of an impact that our dairy customers are interested in, but something that is causing increasing issues around public health and impacts on biodiversity on protected kind of nature sites around the UK. So you'll see that coming out as well. So in terms of kind of diffuse water pollution, these are some of the things that we'll be looking for as we talk to farmers. So sort of nitrogen and phosphate particularly are kind of target nutrients that we'll be looking at through often kind of over application of fertilizers, through leaching from manures or slurry, sort of intensive grazing, sediment runoff from typically from arable fields or kind of poaching on riverbanks. As I mentioned, kind of pesticides, and that's both in terms of how pesticides are applied in field, but also in the yard. What sort of protocols are you following in terms of, bunded filling areas? How are you storing chemicals and so on? Fecal indicator organisms, literally looking at how in certain, particularly in sort of coastal areas, how do sort of organisms that can harm human health get into watercourses and into places where people may be bathing in particular. And then ammonia, as I mentioned before, particularly a sort of an issue arising from the way that we store and spread slurry. So these are some of the areas that we work across the Severn River Basin, as I mentioned earlier. And depending on where you are, you can see there, hopefully, the name of your local advisor. So it might just be worth jotting their name down if you can see them there. So I mentioned that there are kind of two ways that we support farmers to kind of tackle some of these issues where they exist. And the first is through offering sort of bespoke specialist advice to help you kind of manage some of these issues, whilst also kind of thinking about how some of the issues will be impacting on your business as well. So some of the ones that are particularly relevant, I would say, to today. I was at an event yesterday looking at how to improve the kind of the slurry journey on farms, and actually thinking about ammonia in terms of available nitrogen, particularly as we've seen massive spikes in the cost of nitrogen over the last year. Particularly, actually, the value of ammonia loss is significant from, for example, uncovered slurry stores, and the steps that we can take to minimise those losses have a real kind of a fundamental impact on our bottom line if we can get a handle on them. So, one of the things that one of the advice visits we can link you into, for example, is conserving nitrogen through reducing ammonia emissions, and that will have quite a should have a significant ROI in terms of money saved for your business. Similarly, there's visits we can link you into around nutrient management planning. So advisors that will help you to put in place a really kind of bespoke plan based on your own soil requirements, nutrients available through organic slurries and manures, and beginning to sort of work out how you can save costs through sort of improved nutrient management planning. So there's quite a few things there, and I can send around this list afterwards. But that's the kind of list of free advice that we can offer. The other side of what we offer is by sort of opening up access to a number of the options within countryside stewardship. So you may have seen over the years that there are quite a few areas where you need the approval of a catchment sensitive farming advisor to be able to apply for those options to the RPA. And these are all kind of options that are aimed at reducing diffuse water or air pollution. So for example, and hopefully you can see this very kind of prettily drawn picture in front of us, but these are basically the options that we can open up. So they're broadly divided into kind of yard and land-based options. On the capital side, some of the things we will often sort of look at within a yard is roofing over FYM stores, to reduce kind of leachate and slurry being produced as rain falls onto those and potentially gets into clean water drains. Guttering and yard drainage to help kind of keep clean areas of the yard clean and stop water mixing with dirtier areas of the yard. We can also look at things like slurry store covers, to help reduce kind of ammonia losses and the impacts they can have on air quality. Other sort of things that stand out, I suppose, are some of the more kind of land-based options. So things like management of intensive grasslands is one that we see quite a lot. Low input grasslands, so SW7. And arable reversion options as well are ones that you would require catchment sensitive farming approval for. So there's quite a bit there, and basically the way we would work is to come out to your farm and make an assessment based on essentially what we can see as being the issues. So what's the source of pollution that may be being generated on the farm? How is that flowing into the catchment, and where is it flowing to? So what's the source, what's the pathway, and the receptor? And that gives us a sort of a guide to work out what are the best options, both for the environment, but also in terms of making kind of operational improvements for your business as well. And yeah, just some illustrations here of some of the sorts of things that we would look at. So top left, one of the most common things we see is sort of faulty rainwater goods. So rainwater running off of clean roofs onto dirty yards, mixing with anything sort of that's dirty on the yard and then entering clean water drains. That couples quite nicely with the bottom left, you can see there, which is concrete yard renewal. We often find broken concrete, which makes it very, very hard to keep the yard clean, to keep it brushed and swept. If we can renew concrete, improve guttering and so on, it makes it much easier to keep clean water clean and separate from anything dirty on the yard. Top right, we quite a big issue with sediment pollution is poaching on riverbanks, sort of big biodiversity and hydrology impacts as well, to stock grazing right up to the edge of a riverbank. Fencing along watercourses is something we look at quite commonly. We can also sort of fund troughs and sort of new drinking apparatus as well, in conjunction with that option. And then bottom right, looking at kind of slurry store covers is another kind of common area. And just while we're on that point, obviously there is the countryside stewardship options that I've mentioned, and that is a big focus for us over the coming year. Stephen mentioned a lot of the kind of upcoming and the newer schemes around SFI and landscape recovery and so on, but our focus, or our kind of we'll be steering people as much as possible this year in 2023 towards countryside stewardship, whilst there's the kind of clarity and certainty there. But others that are on the horizon that might be worth thinking about if you are managing slurry is the slurry infrastructure grant. I know there's been a lot of interest around it. The basic premise is to help kind of dairy farmers bring slurry storage up to 6 months capacity, so that you're always able to spread at the optimum time of year. And also to look at investing in sort of low emissions spreading technology as well. So just worth thinking about some of the kind of wider grants that are available too. And that's a quick whistle stop tour of how CSF can help. Access to advice, specialist advice, and sort of opening up a wider range of those capital and revenue based options. So I will stop there.
Thank you very much, Pete.
Thank you.
Andrew, I won't put you on the spot now, but I'm sure you had some of those items on your shopping list already done, and maybe there's more to come. But it'd be interesting from your perspective to see what looks attractive, because clearly when you're sort of farming very profitable wheat areas and also rape areas, it's quite a challenge to have the bravery to take those out of the rotation for some of these other items. But maybe we can look at how they can splice in and keep the profitable broadacre farming going at the same time.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll move on. Thank you very much, Pete. That was a great run through. We'll move on to Jenny Phelps, who may be known to many of you in Gloucestershire, I'm sure, and overlaps with all the areas we're talking about, and in some respects pulls them all together as well. So, Jenny, we're looking forward to hearing your presentation, and away you go. Let you know when.
Okay, hopefully you can hear me.
That's
I'm just going to share my screen.
We can hear you, and you're sharing your screen.
And you can see me. Fantastic.
Yeah, so it's all
I'm just trying
well.
to get it onto presentation mode. Perfect. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Phil, for inviting me to talk. I've been asked to talk about blended finance, and obviously all that's gone before on the countryside stewardship and catchment sensitive farming, obviously we really fully support. So would really recommend that people look at that, particularly if you're trying to think about going towards agroecological farming. We know from the farmers at FWAG that we support, and ourselves over the last 7 years have been sort of really confused about, how farming can go forward. And there's been a whole plethora of funding streams that have been put out for us to try and understand, to sort of like help the farming industry understand how they can best benefit from this. So what I'm going to talk a bit about today is how we think that there are some really good opportunities that are evolving for farmers, particularly if they aggregate, but also if they get advice around what is the best opportunity for them in their locality. So I'm going to try and pick that through, because obviously at the moment we've actually got a real problem, haven't we, with the fact that we've got BPS loss, and there are so many different things coming. It's great to have a bit more clarity now around countryside stewardship and the involvement of elm, but there are other things that we need to probably understand a bit as well to make those decisions for our farms. We've been saying for a very long time, and what we need to do is have a much more systems approach to the way that we get funding out to farmers and communities, particularly in a climate emergency, and the role of support and advice for farmers and advisors is really important at the moment, and particularly in a climate emergency, and the fact that we're all starting to feel the change in the weather and understand that we need to build our soil organic matter, and we need to have infrastructure across our landscapes and catchments in a really good condition to hold on to those nutrients, hold on to water when we need it, and manage it when there's too much. We really need to understand our role as farmers within protecting communities, and start to look at funding coming from other sources as well as where we are traditionally used to having them from. So one of the things that we've been doing, working with the local authorities and working with our county council, is to actually encourage farmers to start to think about getting a natural capital baseline map, and to start to build a sustainability standard. And I've only got 10 minutes today, but we will actually, this is really important because it's going to set an opportunity for co-finance and blended finance that actually will give you that environmental baseline. And we're really hoping that, with the systemization, that we're able to take some of your existing maps, so your farm environment records, farm environment plans, and turn those into natural capital maps from which we can understand the ecosystem services that come from your land, because that will be really important, because we're going to try and monetize those. But we also want to enable you to access funding that's coming from our other partnerships, like our economic partnerships, our nature partnerships, our catchment partnerships. So over the last sort of like 10 years, there's been all this different language, hasn't there, around, we're used to having, DEFRA funding us through its agencies, which we've been presenting today, which is brilliant, Natural England, and we've worked with for years. But actually now there's lots of different mechanisms that are starting to evolve. And actually having that foundation of understanding how your farm fits with that and your neighbours is really important. And we've summarised sort of like the elms at the bottom line here, that environmental land management, that now obviously goes back to incorporating countryside stewardship, but it is a foundation that we think is really important to consider first. But there's lots of other things that you can start to get a sort of feel for whether it's of interest to you. So lots of different people are now wanting to get out onto farms, help plant trees, restore hedges, and there's an enormous amount of volunteer action that's taking place. So if you're wanting to improve infrastructure, green infrastructure, or even restore dew ponds or restore ditches or rivers, please do go to your non-government organisations, because a lot of them have got volunteer groups that are starting to amalgamate. So the Wildlife Trust, ourselves, the Council for Protection of Rural England, National Trusts are all starting to help mobilise people to have a resource. The biodiversity net gain is a whole presentation in itself. That's obviously developing with local authorities. In Gloucestershire, we have the Climate and Nature Fund, which is looking to set up pilots around how we can trade biodiversity net gain in Gloucestershire. There's a lot of things to consider within biodiversity net gain, and that is the permanence, the 30 years of conservation covenants, your succession planning, tax implications, and all of those other things that are important. And obviously we've already got other mechanisms coming on board, such as that are already through natural flood management, payments for ecosystem services for water quality, doing a lot with water companies. Carbon trading, which obviously is seems to blow hot and cold. Everybody thinks it's a good idea, then everybody gets a bit cautious about it. Certainly one to watch, but quite challenging. But one of the things that's really interesting is that the Green Finance Institute and the investments are really looking for green investments across whole catchments and landscapes, and looking for really large scale investments up to £100 million. So there is an opportunity for funding out there to have really societally transformative infrastructure that might help the transition to a much more resilient way of living. So we're looking at things like community energy projects, about innovation around new products such as hempcrete plants, all sorts of things. But actually we need to keep an eye on that funding, because if we can create investment ready projects, then we'll be able to get that investment. It's really important from my perspective that we try and align. I've got a meeting with DEFRA straight after this, because we're trying to make sure that the foundation for this investment, all these developing different funding streams, have a common baseline. And a lot of mapping is now done through UK habitat classification, which is a simple way that habitats are managed are quantified on your land. As I say, that can come from existing maps and plans that you have, but that's a foundation for biodiversity net gain and the evolving carbon markets and ecosystem service markets. So it would make sense for CS and ELM to go that way as well. So just to sort of let you know what's happening at the moment is that in our county we've got our local nature partnership that's developed our local nature recovery strategy, or is developing our local nature recovery strategy. It's developed its nature recovery network. This is actually going to be the map they're going to use in transition for biodiversity net gain. We want farmers to feed into that to give accuracy for their land, so that strategic targeting and the development of strategic plans that have now been enacted by the Local Nature Recovery Strategy and Environment Act are contributed to by farmers. But really the opportunities for blended finance are really specific to your locality. They're where you live and what catchment you're in, what district you're in, and what are all the different economic and environmental plans for that area. So you can really simply find out with open source tools the ability to find out how your land has been targeted. And I think this is something that a lot of farmers are quite concerned about at the moment, is there does seem to be an enormous amount of evolution of strategies and plans. And we're really keen at FWAG to make sure that farmers are very much part of that. And that, but I'm sure many of you have used Magic. That helps you look at your countryside stewardship targeting in your local area. Your environmental data, catchment planning, that's really important too, because it helps you understand the pressures of the water quality in your environment. The catchment-based approach is a really, really brilliant thing, because over the last 10 years, catchment partnerships have come together. And if groups of farmers come together, or even individual farmers, want to do things on their land to improve soil health and create sort of benefits for the water environment, your catchment partnerships are all there to help support you and actually integrate funding from those partnerships. And I think somewhere where we've missed a lot of opportunity as farmers and land managers is we haven't really looked at our economic plans and our local nature partnership plans. And these are really scaling. And the reason why that they're really important to us now is because a lot of our local authorities have now got a climate leadership group, which is understanding that our economy is incredibly vulnerable to climate emergency, and that one of those solutions is good land management and agroecological farming, carbon capture, water quality and water management. And so our economic partnerships are now looking at how they can actually work across the county with nature partnerships and local authorities to actually look at how they can support farming. And that obviously works down to lots of communities that are now starting to look at relocalised growing and actually taking on climate emergency projects in their locality, and actually provisioning of land and food, and actually making those communities resilient is going to have lots of different funding streams that come and are supported from those different areas. So it's quite a complicated picture to understand across those sort of social, economic and environmental opportunities. And what we're trying to suggest is that there should be more training, not only to help us as farmers and land managers, but actually have more specialist advisors who can join all that funding together. As I say, a foundation for that will obviously be, supported by countryside stewardship, as we've said, and catchment sensitive farming. But there are other economic and social grants that are coming out that are enabling us to create projects that might help us diversify and become more resilient. So the Farming and Protected Landscapes Fund, for example, and the Future Rural Farming Prosperity Fund, which is coming out quite soon. What we've learned quite recently is the fact that there is a lot of funding that has been thrown out, that sort of like a slide I put up at the beginning about all that different funding. It's coming out from lots of different places at national government, and they're pushing that funding down. You hear it on the news all the time about people saying, oh, there's £3 billion for this, or there's £2 billion for that, pushing it down to the county councils and basically saying to the county councils, you can deliver on all of these different agendas. And since austerity in 2012, the local authorities don't have a delivery structure to be able to get this money out. So if we as communities and farmers and groups of farmers start to create projects that deliver across all those social and economic agendas, we can start to help the local authorities to actually spend that money and actually get it out to us as farmers. It's a different way for us looking at the way we get funding. We're used to having these national funding streams, which are all also integrated into that. But actually, there's some really, really amazing opportunities. So we've had £250,000 for Feeding Gloucestershire. We're looking about how we can include sort of social health and well-being into our farming projects. We're looking about how people in food poverty could have access to people in to grow food locally. So currently you will have lots of different advisors who are advising you to do lots of different things, and we're hoping that we can start to align this so that everybody can think about how they can best support farmers to agroecological transition, how we can actually make sure we can collect an environmental baseline, that actually we can make sure that farmers can be supported and co-invested into at a time when that society needs us to be able to make us more resilient from flooding, drought and food security. So aligning all of the things that our advisors are actually advising us on is really important. I was just going to run through really quickly. We've got a survey running at the moment, which I'll put in the chat, which is to try and ask you where you're getting your advice from, so we can bring everybody together into a shared picture for how we can get all this investment and resilience out to communities now. So just to say really quickly that the environmental register has been set up. So if your BASIS is qualified, that BASIS are now going through a whole process by which they can help feed into this and make sure that all the advice provision that is given in a way that's standardized and professional. And we're also helping to train facilitators to do this complex join up in every locality is what the dream is, because we know it's hugely cost beneficial, and that this picture of multiple different funding strands, both from a local, so county, catchment, national level, is quite complicated, and it is actually really easy to facilitate that, and there is a process that we use for you to understand what those opportunities are for you locally and get that sort of finance. And what the ambition is that this is all going to be set up on a national hub that is actually being developed and funded by the Worldwide Fund for Nature and the Rivers Trust, so that you can go on to an open source hub, find local advisors that will be specialists and actually specialists and facilitators, and be able to create local projects that align you to your neighbouring farmers, your water body, your catchment and your community, so you can actually start to think about how to work together to get this investment. So just to finish off, what we know so far is Sustainable Farm Incentive will continue, as we know. We heard all about this, which is great. It does say on the guidance that you can stack carbon, and having been involved with carbon, the Soil Farm Carbon Code, it's interesting to know that, but I'm not sure, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not sure there's detail in how that's actually going to happen. We know that countryside stewardship is back, hurrah, because actually, we've had that presentation, and that's really brilliant about that flexibility. And we know that landscape recovery will continue, and obviously facilitation fund and groups of farmers and farmer clusters absolutely essential for this, because that co-investment, the opportunity for that high level investment, only comes with aggregation. As a nation, we've got very small field parcels across a small landscape, so global investment is much easier in bigger countries like Australia and America and Canada. So we need to aggregate together to enable to get investment from those high level green investors. We also know that BNG and carbon at the moment can't be stacked. So if you're looking at biodiversity net gain, do get in touch. We can give you the contact details of what's happening in Gloucestershire, and Rachel Lenan, who's leading on the Climate and Nature Fund, if you want to be involved in their pilot. We know currently that the Local Government Association have put out guidance to say you can't stack BNG and carbon on the same parcels, but there's a chance that carbon may be something that you could get from those projects in 20 years' time. That's not been ruled out. We know there's still carbon markets evolving, and some of those are being slightly sort of undermined at the moment because there's been complications with the ferro system, which is something that was trying to give some integrity with that. So be a little cautious around trading carbon and BNG at all. Always ask the intermediary how much percentage that they're taking in these agreements. We know, I think Susie's going to talk a bit about some water company payments for ecosystem services funding that's coming, and obviously there's a huge amount of work going on at the moment about developing funding for natural flood management. And what we're really hoping is this will be around revenue payments. So we're looking at trying to take some of that sort of hard engineering funding that's been going into concrete for flooding to go into building soil organic matter and giving farmers revenue payments that will actually help with BPS loss. Really interesting stuff around food security. You know, our local authority, our local enterprise partnership, our nature partnerships are now really excited about the idea that they might be able to procure food from our own county if they can quantify the landscape, and the way that you're managing the landscape will deliver for their other duties for flooding, water quality, air quality, biodiversity, climate, social well-being. So this is a really interesting thing that we're working on at FWAG, is how we can attribute function to the land. So food, fibre and fuel from those landscapes can actually be delivering against all of these heightening legal agendas, and local authorities and procurement could actually be really very much part of that conversation. But we do all need, I think, and just to finish off, we all do need to understand how to realise all these local opportunities. More training's needed and more people out there to actually help facilitate the opportunities for you, because at the end of the day, it will be specific to your farm business, your succession planning, your tenure, you know, your tax planning, and actually where you are in the locality that you farm. And all of that is bespoke to where you live and is relevant to each individual field parcel, how you connect all that together. So understanding how you can maximise those opportunities is something that we all have to learn how to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. That's a great and an amazing roundup. A couple of points that sort of jump out at me. We touched on carbon as our last Monitor Farm meeting, actually, and as you say, it's a bit of a minefield that people are blowing hot and cold on. But hopefully, those that attended last time, if you've done nothing else, you've at least got yourself onto a carbon tool and got some sort of measurement for your farm. And Jenny, you're right about volunteer groups. I remember John Pawsey at a previous Monitor Farm meeting we had from Suffolk telling us he'd welcomed any butterfly group or flower group or any other group onto the farm, because at the end of the day, it's information, it's baselining, and it's tools in his armoury to provide evidence for schemes. And Jenny, you've exemplified the complexity of it all, and it strikes me that Andrew, as farm manager there, is going to have to think whether he spends time sitting on a tractor or sitting in the office trying to work it all out, and which is a more profitable use of his time. But I think it is exciting that there are so many opportunities, and they are, to use the expression this morning, stacking up, or potentially stacking up to provide good levels of income onto the farm. So we'll move straight on to our final speaker. Delighted we've got Susie Bamber, Senior Agricultural Advisor from Severn Trent, joining us. I know from my own home experience in the further southwest that with Wessex Water and Poole Harbour and Tone and Parrot at Taunton and so on, that the water authorities play a massive part in the rural economy now. And delighted to you to join us, Susie, and share your thoughts on the subject. Over to you. And we can see your screen and slides. That's all working well. Thank you.
And hopefully hear me as well.
Yep,
I do have a bit of background noise. It has moved a little bit now, but so apologies if you can hear that.
We can't hear it now.
Wonderful. So thank you very much for inviting AHDB and the Monitor Farm, inviting Severn Trent to talk about their grant schemes. It's going to be a bit of a whistle-stop tour, I'm afraid, but there is a lot of this information. You'll find it all on our website, and there's some links at the end of the presentation. And if you've got any queries about any of the schemes or catchments, then do email our Farming for Water email address, which is just down there at the bottom of the screen, farmingforwater@severntrent.co.uk, and one of the team will contact you. Right, how are we doing this? There we go. So I'm just going to do a quick overview. We're going to talk about why Severn Trent are doing catchment management, where in the Severn Trent region the catchments are, a little bit about our Severn Trent Environmental Protection Scheme, we know as STEPS, and some of the priority packages within that. And then we will quickly mention some of the other schemes we have available. So we have a scheme open at the moment called the Closed Transfer System Offer. And then in our bathing river catchments, we've got Test, Protect and Improve. We have biodiversity schemes in our STEPS scheme offering, but also through our ecology and biodiversity team. And then I'll quickly provide a source of contact to our bioresources team. So why are we doing catchment management at Severn Trent? So it's seen as a sustainable option. So for every pound spent, we potentially could be saving a £2 to £20 saving on treatment costs, and it can provide a £4 wider environmental benefits. So it's sort of seen as that sustainable option. We obviously there are risks of extraction impacted by water quality, so diffuse water pollution from potentially a range of sources, farming being one of those. And so we have these priority catchments. So we have pesticide catchments, nitrate and crypto catchments. So in the Severn Trent region, we typically work, and our schemes are typically offered in these things called catchments, which are those coloured blobs there on the left hand side of the screen. This map can be found in our handbook, which you can find online as a PDF. Online you can also there's a section where you put your postcode in and it will show you if you're in a catchment as well, which is quite useful. So I'm the advisor for Worcestershire and Gloucestershire, so I'm down here, this purple blob, and going towards the orange blob at the bottom there, so that's my catchment. But yeah, so there's 44 of those catchments, and I work with Severn Trent employed staff, and then 12 partnership advisors with organisations such as the Trent Rivers Trust, the Severn Rivers Trust and the Wildlife Trusts. We all do the same role, and we go out on farm and we provide advice on how potentially our grant scheme can support a farming business. We organise webinars and events, and so yeah, trying to provide a bit of on-farm advice and support. So our Severn Trent STEP scheme is the main one that is our main offering. It's a voluntary scheme. Every application is scored. It's a competitive process. It's an open window, so you can apply every month. It is currently shut, but it closed on 31st of January. It will reopen in March with the new offering, which is very exciting. And then in April, our biodiversity offering will also be opening. In the scheme, there's over 50 options, which sounds confusing, but actually it's split up into the priorities. And if you work with your local advisor, they'll know the scheme inside out and they'll be able to help you. So so there's a lot of different options, but if what you want to do and you think it's going to have like a really great water quality benefit, it's not in that list. We have something really really special called Farmer Innovation. So you can put your justification on the application. We need one quote. Do talk to your local advisor, but you could submit something which isn't in the book. And we have had plenty of people who have done that. And, you know, I think that's an amazing thing that we can offer in our scheme. Majority of the items in the book you'll see is at a 50% fixed rate cost. And the option costs have changed as sort of inflation and prices have gone up on various items, as well as been uplifts on items we'll cover a little bit in a moment. So typically there's no minimum amount you can apply for in a STEPS grant scheme. There is a maximum of £10,000 except for our new pesticide washdown offer. I move on. So in the priority option list, we have one for pesticides, and that is our pesticide washdown offer. So it is basically what it says on the screen there. So 50% funding up to £20,000 plus the rainwater harvesting. And then a very special thing, if you can complete the works in 6 months, then there's a maximum grant offer of £30,000, which is also linked in with one of the specialist on-farm advice visits. So a consultant will come out to the farm, they'll have a look at perhaps the positioning of the shares, some of the spec regulations, they'll put it all together in a report, and you'll also have that to go with your application and, you know, your build of your washdown. What a washdown actually is it's the concrete base, the bonded concrete base. It's the roof and the biofilter or the bio bed that you'd have with that. There's a lovely picture there on the screen of one. Hang on. In our groundwater catchments, we have cover crop as a priority option. Nice picture of some Phacelia there. So in our groundwater cover crop package, we have got all the rates have been increased. So yeah, standard cover crops, your white mustard, brown mustard, your cereal, all those sort of typical cover crop ones, that's £125 per hectare per year, so an annual application for those cover crops potentially. We also do grass after maize at £60 a hectare. There's various other options, so do have a look in the handbook or online. And then coupled with that, if you wanted to, we can also offer you some soil sampling, so PK, MG, pH, book SNS, organic matter, but there's a suite of them, so you could select which ones you thought were more relevant to your particular holding. And there's also a suite of webinars that will be happening in the rest of this year, really. So that's, you know, it's a nice package there. And then moving on to crypto. Oh, we haven't got crypto. Sorry about that. But within the STEPS grant scheme, there are a range of other options as well. So you'll get your there's margin options, fencing options. As I say, there's over 50 options. So do have a look at the list. It's just a really quick run through. So what else have we got available? So you may have heard of something called Swap Your Nozzle. This has been a webinar scheme, which is Chris Tolley has been providing some webinars for Severn Trent. The webinars are BASIS and Aroso accredited, so you can get those CPD points. And if you're a farmer in one of our priority pesticide catchments, you can also, through watching it and supplying the correct evidence, claim a free set of low drift 3 or 4 star nozzles. We are now on our last webinar of Swap Your Nozzle for the time being, but this one's really special because we're opening it up, so it's open to anyone in the Severn Trent region to you know, watch that webinar. You can get CPD points for watching it. Unfortunately, I don't think you can get a set of nozzles, but if you are in a pesticide catchment, even with this webinar, you'll be able to claim the nozzles. And if you're interested in booking, please just send an email to our Farming for Water email address. I've mentioned our specialists on farm advice, but we have a massive range of, I think there's 11 types of specialists on farm advice visits, all sort of following a practical on-farm visit with a follow-up report that you can use for your STEPS application or just for your own interest and knowledge, which are available. We also offer biodiversity steps options as well. So these would include things like herbal lays, wildflower margins, wildflower meadows, feeding farmland birds, summer catch crops. There's a range of options again for that, and your local advisor can help you with applying for those. Everything you apply for online through our Flexi Grant portal, and your advisor can also help with producing evidence packs so once those items have been installed. So and then another biodiversity offering we have is something actually run by our biodiversity and ecology team called Boost for Biodiversity, or B for B. So we'll go on to some of those things in more details. So the closed transfer system offer is a brand new offer. It's open now and is open to contractors and farmers spraying in our pesticide priority catchments. Currently, we're offering it at 100% funding. There's a choice of 2 different products currently, and Severn Trent will also pay for any fitting or installation that's required. The closed transfer systems will also be going into our STEPS handbook. But once it goes in the handbook after February, it'll be at a 50% funding rate. There's some evidence that we need as well, obviously, for those packs. Then another scheme is, sorry if you can see this presenting bar at the top, is Test, Protect and Improve, which is linked to one of our bathing river catchments. This one is actually, if I just move you there slightly, is in the Avon and Lem kind of area, just sort of next to Coventry area. So with that, looking at sort of a webinar program, livestock testing kits, health plans, and working with vets. And then with biodiversity, we have got, this is the Boost for Biodiversity scheme. we run bioecology and biodiversity. If you've got any questions about this, the general queries message is here, the ecology matters at severntrent.co.uk. This grant scheme will open the end of February, so really soon, and then it does actually shut this one in March. It's open to the whole of the Severn Trent region, which is amazing, and it can be, doesn't have to be on like with farmers, but if you've got any questions about it, look online or contact Ecology Matters. There's a few examples of a few projects there as well. I'm sorry I'm going really fast. I'm just really aware that I've got 10 minutes and I'm slightly over in my practices. So we also have bioresource team who have biosolids and clean water silt products that farm holders can use on their land. If you are interested in any of our biosolids or water silt products, please contact Ben Perry, which is one of our farm liaison officers. His mobile number is there on the screen and his email address. I'll just leave that for a second in case you want to note it down. So I'm really sorry about the speed I'm going at. Anyway, thank you very much. There's some contact details for you. So you've got the Farming for Water general email box for that swap your nozzle or any of our step scheme questions. You can find your local advisor, and if you're in catchment as well, online. And then that's me at the bottom. So I'm Susan Bamber, my mobile, and I cover around Worcestershire, so sort of Bromsgrove, Droitwich, Worcester, Tewkesbury, Malvern, and then I sort of have a gap, and then I cover kind of around Ketford, Newark, Red Marley, and around that sort of area. So thank you very much for your time. And if you've got any questions, I'm happy to answer those when we have a question and answer slot.
Thank you, Susie. That's great. And sorry to put you and everybody else under pressure with time. It's been a great whistle-stop tour around all the different organisations, but hopefully useful. And folks can replay at half speed if they want to, and freeze recordings to catch website addresses and so on. Susie, there was just a quick question for you straight off, which I'll deal with now from Robert. And I think it's referring to the STEPS programme, but does this scheme work in the Thames area as well, do you know?
So all the water companies do have their own catchment scheme programmes. So they are all slightly different. I think Jenny might actually have some details of the Thames. I think they do work with WAG, which is great. So yeah, they will have scheme. It will not be identical to STEPS, but they will have their own support packages. Something I didn't mention about STEPS is it's when you do apply for STEPS, you have a 12-month window to carry out whatever works you've been successful with securing, and you can then claim, but any time in that period as well. So just in case anyone had any questions about the claiming sort of process. Thanks,
Susie. Jenny, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Yeah, there's a Thames Water catchment fund that we administer and help support through WAG. So and there's just a new revitalised contracts with Thames Water to help farmers in the Upper Thames for sure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, we'll move on to a time as much as we need for questions. There's quite a few of us on the call, so it'll be really good if we could follow good Teams etiquette and use the hand raise symbol at the top bar, and that will alert me to anybody that wants to pose a question. But in the meantime, while some of you are thinking that, I'll put Andrew on the spot. And as farm manager there at Boddington, Andrew, there's a lot to take in there this morning, and some of it you'll have come across. But is there anything as a farm manager looking to replace BPS that sort of jumps out of you and something to pursue?
Well, if I wasn't confused before we started, I certainly am now. There's an awful lot there, an awful lot. And I think from a personal perspective, I think that's some of the issues around this. It is a really complex subject, and there is so much on offer to us. And I think the only way to really take it in is to get those advisors on farm. I mean, we're taking advantage of some of those schemes, but there's so much there that we could utilise, and hopefully we will going forward. Certainly there's lots there that we would be interested in. I mean, one thing that just jumped out at me then was something we've been looking at for a long time, and that's the closed transfer system for sprayers. That's been a hugely expensive system or in development, it's been hugely expensive, and that sort of offer is really interesting from a health and safety point of view, and going forward, improving what we do and looking after the environment. So that's one thing. Rainwater harvesting is important, I think, not relying on mains water. Interestingly, looking at the guttering and the concreting of yards, etc., we're very lucky here. We have a clean and tidy yard, but a lot of our guttering runs down on the yard, and I can see that a hell of a lot of pollution comes from farmyards. So all those sorts of offers are certainly worth looking at. But the one thing that keeps coming back all the time to me is with a lot of these schemes is talking about taking productive land out of production. Should we be doing that? We need to eat, the world needs to eat, and I think we've got to be very mindful with all these schemes that we don't start taking huge swathes of land out of production to put in some of these lucrative schemes. That's just my view. But certainly, yeah, there's so much there that is of interest and really valuable. And I think it's a case for me of getting people on farm and sitting down and looking at what suits our system and our farm best.
Great, thank you, Andrew. Yeah, I think that's a really good point you make about the broad acre schemes, and I guess the other thing I would say is that, again, you must take account. You've got to stay in business profitably, as you said at the beginning, and some of these schemes, there is a big pot of money in them, but also you've got to spend money to fulfil the scheme's requirements as well. So in terms of cash flow, and cash is king, cash flow to the business, that needs to be carefully considered as well.
And just add in, Philip, that as you rightly say, what we all need to remember is these schemes do also come at a cost, whether it's stewardship or there is a lot of inputs to go into these schemes, seed, land preparation, etc. They are not free schemes, and they are quite costly.
Yeah. Okay, I've got some different hands appearing, and a facility I didn't realise Teams did before. Maybe it's a new thing, but hopefully they put the order of hands so I don't offend anybody by jumping the queue. So first, there's a question from Laura. Laura, do you want to demute yourself and fire away?
Thank you. I'm not sure whether Pete or Susan had something else to say in response to Andrew before I answer my question, because I noticed their hands were up as well.
Go on, you fire away. Now you've got the floor. You fire
that's
away.
Fine. No, I can do that. Thank you very much. Firstly, thank you so much for the speakers as well. That was really, really informative. I'm an agricultural consultant, so obviously out on farm quite a lot and advising on a lot of these different schemes. So that was a real good summary of everything, although a lot to take in all at once. So my question really, I think, will be for Pete to answer, is historically, through catchment sensitive farming, we've had the areas that have been high and medium priorities for water catchments. Going forwards, is that going to be the same, or there's only various pockets of those who aren't in high or medium priorities in the southwest, but there are some clients that do have broken concrete and looking to roof muck stores and things to help with the water quality and air quality aspects, but don't fall into those catchment areas. So is there anything we can be doing there in the meantime? But any advice would be much appreciated. Thank you.
Yes, so the basically the high and medium priority areas cover more or less everywhere now. I mean, it's sort of, there's only a few pockets that aren't covered. My understanding is that going forward, the prioritization is going to matter less. I'm not crystal clear at this stage on exactly sort of, well, whether that's going to be removed completely, but my understanding is that, well, I know that we are moving towards prioritizing farms based on what the data shows us that the likelihood of pollution is on that holding, and in terms of how we will proactively approach farmers, that will guide our approach in terms of who we most want to come to events and those sorts of things. At the same time, we also acknowledge that there are there are a lot of farms where they may not be in a high priority area, but what they're doing is is contributing to diffuse pollution in that catchment, and we will be, looking at those farms for as eligible for grants going forward. So in short, yes, you can start conversations with those farmers.
Brilliant. Thank you. Hi. I just think something else probably to mention in there, and kind of just generally, is that I have carried out a number of joint visits. So you can organise a joint visit with Catchment Sensitive Farming and with your Severn Trent local advisor. So I've done a number of where I've had all sorts of, there's lots of advice on farm, but we've all walked around and we've tried to draw agreements together. So if you've got a stewardship agreement or catchment sensitive farming, but we can't fund exactly the same item, but we can fund different things that are making up a bigger project. So there is that flexibility, which I think is really useful. And you can apply obviously for our grant year after year as well, so you can build things up slowly as well with our scheme, because obviously you've got to get the work done, so it takes time to do these things. You have to fit it in with everything else you're doing on farm. So I think you can be, it's good to speak to both advisors, and we can sometimes come out together as well, which I think is an important aspect to be aware of.
Yeah, I just would echo that. Just a practical example, recently I went to a farm that was in a high priority area for phosphates and pesticides, and it was an ex-dairy farm that had been taken over by they were sort of doing a mixed sort of beef and arable. They needed work doing around sort of covering muck stores and some loafing areas, as well as some broken concrete on the yard. But they were sort of filling the sprayer over an area of broken concrete. Obviously, that was quite a big issue, but we were able to kind of preserve the countryside stewardship funding, which is a kind of typically a 20k cap, to focus on the rainwater goods and the concreting, whilst Severn Trent were able to look at the sprayer, creating a new kind of sprayer washdown area. So they were able to draw on both of those pots of funding concurrently, to maximise both and address 2 or 3 things within the yard. So it's definitely worth sort of thinking about that if you can see that there are quite a few things you'd like to consider.
Thanks, Pete. Question from me actually to Steve Bellingham. Steve, we just had the another suite of schemes and standards announced and some indications of what's available. Are there is there a programme, a diary of more ahead of that into this year and beyond, or?
I saw the other day a sort of list from the RPA actually of key dates, and that sort of shows the capital schemes going on into 24, but DEFRA haven't announced what's happening in 24 yet, so we're expecting and awaiting the detail of what's coming in 24 in terms of mid-tier and higher tier, Philip.
Susie, just picking up on what Susie said earlier, actually, she's given me an idea, Andrew. We brought everyone together for this meeting by teams, and maybe an idea for a future meeting on farm is to bring you all together again and walk the farm, and just share your knowledge with what you see in front of you, so we could have a sort of a meeting on that sense, but that's something for the future. Questions from Robert.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Robert. That's great. Far away.
I've been in ELS and HLS for many years, and I've almost maxed the farm out on it, really. But I was wondering how I could use SFI and countryside stewardship to raise the money a bit, because there's no real other option. When they come round and give you any options, they say, oh, well, join countryside stewardship, but I've already done it, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, no. Jenny, would you be the best person to address that one?
Well, hopefully. I mean, I think at the moment what we're doing, and obviously Robert's very involved with FWAG. He's been a trustee and everything. So and as I said, an amazing amazing farm. I think what we've come to the conclusion is that we have to do a proper assessment for each farm to see what they've got, what they could have, and how that fits with the farm business. So I know that if people are asking about, adding things into existing schemes, or maybe that decision to end an existing scheme and then pick up in a new scheme. But I mean, this is one of the challenges that we've got, is there's some amazing people around who've been doing a lot of good stuff for a very long time, and additionality is quite challenging to find on some of those farms. So that's why, in a sense, we've been trying to look at other things that farmers can get revenue streams from. So it is a question of really looking at all the options in that one locality. But as I say, Robert's done some brilliant things. And just to say, if that in relation to that suggestion about going to Andrew's farm, is it doesn't actually take that long to do that scoping I was talking about. And if you did want to do that, I could scope out Andrew's farm for all of those local projects and opportunities if you wished. And we would do the same if we went to Robert's farm. We would see how to contextualise the farm within the landscape and catchment, and that's really important for people, I think.
Okay, Jenny, thanks for that. One or two hands have been popping up and popping down again, so I think our speakers have obviously been answering questions as we've been going along. So I'll sort of pause and talk slowly just to give anybody a chance to answer any final questions they want to. But in the absence of the yellow flashing hand, I'll draw the meeting to a close by just saying thank you all very much for attending, especially to our four speakers and Andrew. It's been a lot of information to swallow, but all the information is there on websites and through recording on the recording. Please do make use of it. I hope you found it useful. We'll look forward to seeing you next on the 22nd of June. Seems a long way away, but it will quickly come round, I'm sure, which will be the summer meeting with Andrew at Boddington Estates. I actually won't be there. I'm lucky enough to be hanging up my boots shortly, so my successor, Hannah Bowden, will be masterminding that meeting. But just that reminds me to say, finish by saying thank you all very much again. Thank you to the speakers. Thank you for those participating and joining the meeting. It's been good to have you all along. Thank you. Bye-bye for now.